I've noticed something in the last couple of years that maybe you've noticed this too. You go out to the grocery store or to some place where you're greeted by the clerk or the checkout person or the waitress, and they ask you, well, how's your day going? Have you heard that? And I find myself irritated when people ask me that question. You know, it's like I'm responsible for like having a great day. Is that what you're trying to tell me? It's up to me to kind of make my day what it is. And you know, I find that very interesting, and I seriously had been very irritated, because what it would cause me to have to do is to have to self-reflect, and in the middle of a busy day to take time to self-reflect and decide how my life is going. You know, that's kind of rude. But when we really think about this, I mean, this little graphic is pretty interesting. How folks are really interested in their past life experiences. You know, tell me about that. I'm really excited, interested in that. Or they want their fortune told. They want their future to be told. Nobody wants to stand in line and figure out what's happening in this present moment that's making me feel the way I'm feeling. And so we shy away from checking in on ourselves. And yet we run the risk of living in this kind of backdrop of all the things that are happening in our life that we just really don't want to plug into, because if we did, we would recognize that our life is looking and feeling quite against us most of the time. Or at least that's the way we have it. That's the way it seems. And so to kind of check in to see if that's what's really going on, that's not something that we're kind of trained to do. We're not trained to be present to what we're having, especially if it looks and feels against us. We're trained to push it away. We're trained to make somebody or something the matter with us. That's our conditioning. And yet we don't know that that's what's creating our experience, our sense of what's happening in our life. And so we kind of have to awaken to the fact that until we create a practice around being awake and with what's happening in our life, so that we can own what we're being with what we're having, so that we can choose to decide how that way of being is going to be. Bless you. Until we get to that place where we understand that it's up to us to decide how we're going to be with what's happening in our life, instead of what's happening in our life determines how we're going to look and feel about ourselves or things. So I'm in this process of talking about meditation, and there are various types of meditation. I'm focusing on what I believe is a very effective meditative process that Dr. Joe has created out of the great body of work that he's generated. And so there are various types of meditation processes, both with respect to Dr. Joe's approach as well as traditional meditation practices. But for instance, there's a sitting practice. Most of us are familiar with the sitting practice, but do we understand that the intent behind being able to sit and really work internally is about transcending our body-mind? Sort of experiencing a dimension of ourself that is independent of our body, of our sense of self, our sense of place or proximity with respect to what we're having, or any sense of time. We have to transcend that dimension that keeps us locked into, plugged into all the ways in which the outer affects us. We have to create a counterbalance to that effect, that conditioning, so that we can recognize that source is within us, not out there. If we believe that the source of our well-being or the source of our discomfort is out there in the effects of life, then we try to fix what's going on outside of ourselves, instead of recognizing that if I'm feeling as if my life is against me, that's arising from within me, as opposed to it being with respect to what I'm having. And then we have to also recognize that we have to walk this consciousness around. And so there's a walking meditation practice where, in Dr. Joe's context, we're walking into our desired future. We have to live that. We have to feel it. We have to be it. And if we're not practicing what that desired future could be like for us, we're not retraining the circuitry that brings forth our current present reality. We're not reconditioning our body to an awareness that has us as being magnificent or capable or empowered or able to accomplish a greater purpose. We don't develop that part of ourselves until we mentally rehearse it and live in that awareness. And then there's a lying down kind of meditation practice where we really integrate and allow our nervous system to catch up with what we're trying to reprogram our subconscious mind with respect to the new insights that we may glean when we tap into dimensions of our awareness that aren't tethered to issues of the past or issues or cares of the world. There is a dimension of us that we can develop into that place, that consciousness. And what I'm going to talk about today is a practice that I've developed as a way of synthesizing all of Dr. Joe's material and to really help myself be present to my life as I walk my self-system around my world. I have to become aware of when I've lost myself into the stories of my life, when I've lost the ability to manage how I'm being with what I'm having. Something else has taken over, and I need to know when that happens so I can do something else besides let myself be a victim or let myself be subjected to the effects of what I'm having in my life. I need to become cause unto my life experience. And so I'm in this question. I want to ask this question with you. Have you ever wondered why the things that we really want in our life it seems to be so hard to get, and yet the things that we don't want in our life find us? Have you ever had that experience? And I've wondered, how is that possible? Why does that happen? And you know, there's science behind this. There's science behind, brain science behind why it is that it's so hard for us to accomplish, to manifest a greater good, and yet it's so easy for us to draw into our life the very things that we would push away. And so what if there's nothing broken about that phenomenon? What if there's a reason why that's so? And wouldn't it be important for us to know the reason why that is so we can do something about it? We can align with the science, and we can work with this body-mind system in a very intelligent and precise way so that we can recondition it to really know its worth, really so that we really know that we have the capacity to be with whatever we're having and not be diminished by it. But we can't just know that in our head. We have to actually experience that sense of empowerment, that sense that we can be greater than what we're having. And so if we understand, and this is something that Dr. Joe reminds us of, that 95% of our behavior comes from a dimension of us that's not conscious. This comes from a place in us that's not conscious. In other words, there's a conditioned aspect of how we live our life, how we walk ourselves around in this world, that is independent of the truth of us, but that has been created by virtue of our taking in the messages and the beliefs and the systems and the conditioning that happens when we're born into a belief in separation or born into a world where there is duality or these opposites. And so we have to recognize that there is a dimension of ourself that runs when we're not watching, when we're not present to how we're being ourselves. And so if we don't know that we are run by an unconscious self system, we won't go to look at that circuitry that comprises that self system and begin to create in new and different ways. And so what I'm wanting to share now is a video, another short clip from Dr. Joe, who explains the circuitry that keeps us locked into unconscious behaviors that manifests or draws into our life the very things that we aren't wanting for ourselves, and yet at the same time, the very things that we hunger and thirst for, we find it difficult, if not impossible, to bring forth because we're eclipsed by our habits that keep us locked into a predictable future. And so Dr. Joe will explain this very well, but what we want to land on is an understanding, a clarity about what runs us. And all of you have received a handout that I'm going to ask that you take home with you and study, and I'm going to explain it in a little bit later. But just so you know that there's work for you to do after this, homework for you. So do you have a handout? If you need a handout, raise your hand. they'll make their way over to you. Okay, and here's the movie while that's going on.
Well, a habit is a redundant set of automatic, unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through repetition. The habit is when you've done something so many times that your body now knows how to do it better than your mind. So if you think about it, people wake up in the morning, they begin to think about their problems. Those problems are circuits of memories in the brain. Each one of those memories are connected to people and things at certain times and places. And if the brain is a record of the past, the moment they start their day, they're already thinking in the past. Each one of those memories has an emotion. Emotions are the end product of past experiences. So the moment they recall those memories of their problems, they all of a sudden feel unhappy, they feel sad, they feel pain. Now, how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So the person's entire state of being when they start their day is in the past. So what does that mean? The familiar past will sooner or later be a predictable future. So if you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, and you can't think greater than how you feel, or feelings have become the means of thinking, by very definition of emotions, you're thinking in the past. And for the most part, you're going to keep creating the same life. So then people grab their cell phone, they check their WhatsApp, they check their text, they check their emails, they check Facebook, they take a picture of their feet, they post it on Facebook, they tweet something, they do Instagram, they check the news, and now they feel really connected to everything that's known in their life. And then they go through a series of routine behaviors. They get out of bed on the same side, they go to the toilet, they get a cup of coffee, they take a shower, they get dressed, they drive to work the same way, they do the same things, they see the same people, they push the same emotional buttons, and that becomes the routine, and it becomes like a program. So now they've lost their free will to a program, and there's no unseen hand doing it to them. So when it comes time to change, the redundancy of that cycle becomes a subconscious program. So now 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old is a memorized set of behaviors, emotional reactions, unconscious habits, hardwired attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions that function like a computer program. So then a person can say with their 5% of their conscious mind, I want to be healthy, I want to be happy, I want to be free. But the body's on a whole different program. So then how do you begin to make those changes? Well, you have to get beyond the analytical mind, because what separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind is the analytical mind. And that's where meditation comes in, because you can teach people through practice how to change their brainwaves, slow them down. And when they do that properly, they do enter the operating system where they can begin to make some really important changes. So most people then wait for crisis or trauma or disease or diagnosis, and they wait for loss, some tragedy to make up their mind to change. And my message is why wait? And you can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, or you can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration. I think right now, the cool thing is that people are waking up.
Yes. So I've created this diagram to help me understand the effort in terms of, what is this thing running me, my unconscious self? What are the circuits that represent the effort that I have to really embrace? And so this is just a tool. There's no reality in it other than it helps me be present to, I'm needing to address the habits that run me unconsciously. I need to observe them and understand the unintended consequences of living as if someone or something is against me. And so as we begin to understand the circuits that really create our self system and recognize that it's not good or bad, we have these circuits because that's just a part of who we are. It's because we no longer have the sense of empowerment or a sense of being able to really have capacity in our life. We feel a victim, or we feel victimized by what we're having. And that's the unfortunate thing. So what I've created for you is a diagram that's labeled how our habits habituate us to the habits of scarcity, judgment, and struggle. And so I'm not going to talk about this right now until the end of my talk, where I'll talk about the spirit group's practice, or a practice that you can use this handout for. But suffice to say that whenever we're run by our habits of being, or lost in a sense of unconscious a way of being with what we're having, we allow the world to modulate us. We become susceptible to the belief in separation, and that creates the habits of having not enough, the habits of finding fault or criticizing or judging, and the habit of really struggling to have any sense of empowerment or any sense of fulfillment in our life. And we need to know what we do to ourselves that keeps those habits of being activated. And without an intervention, without a practice that helps us awaken so that we can reprogram these circuits, our life just runs automatically. And just all you have to do is get in your car and you realize that your body knows how to drive better than you do. I mean, when somebody shows up in front of you and you swerve, you didn't think to do that. Your body did that because it's trained to do that. Our body is trained to do all sorts of things, but it's also trained to feel not enough. It's also trained to feel like it doesn't measure up. We have trained ourselves based upon what we've allowed to become a part of our identity or a part of our belief system. And until we expunge those elements of what drives our conscious understanding and our meaning making, we become susceptible to being victims in our life. And the other diagram that you're taking home is to understand that we have our life how our life is. In other words, we need to understand how we're having our life. We have our life, for us or not, based upon these circuits. There's nothing about what's going on in our life that makes what we're having for us or against us. But it's about how we're being with it that determines that. Can you see how that's so? Okay, and then the next thing that we need to understand is that the lower circuits are all about the story that we tell, the proof, the story in our head. And if we don't intervene when we're listening to a voice, that's not our voice, it's the voice of the system. And we need to differentiate the difference between the story that we are generating and who is listening to it. Because the story that is generating is not you, it's the system. But if you listen to it, it sustains your state. And if your state is a mood or a temperament or an attitude, you carry that around with you as a filter, and you take everything in its insufficiency instead of in its fullness. And so when we recognize that we have our life as it is unto us, and that we have proof, we have life experience to point to, this is what happened, but you see, we attach to the events and circumstances in our life the evidence that we've gleaned to sustain the belief of who we are and why we are the way we are. And all of that is the system. It's not the truth of us, and we can reboot that system. We can change that. We can recondition the body to a different circuitry. And when we understand that that's our job, then we can use these tools of meditation. And we can be more precise with respect to how we're retraining our attention awareness to reframe our life, not as if it's against us, but as if it's calling us forth, to bring it on, the truth of us. And then finally, in this diagram, I circle this sensing aspect because there's a part of our brain that is always on the lookout for what's against us. It's called the negativity bias. Our brain is equipped to always make everything against us so it's never unsafe. That's sort of the default way. And we have to override that circuitry if we're to be present to the gifts of life, because they're packaged in all kinds of different containers. And a lot of the containers can look and feel kind of yucky to kind of unravel, like cancer or debt or conflict. All of those packages contain treasures and richness if we are able to really bring ourselves to really understanding that we have the capacity to transform what we're having into something that really moves us into a greater expression of our purpose and passion. So, what I'm wanting us to kind of recognize is that this dimension of, as Dr. Joe says, the effort is to recondition the body. The body is the circuitry, the unconscious self, to a different mind, which means reprogramming those habits. We still have the circuits of being, doing, having, feeling, believing, and perceiving, and sensing. We still have those circuits, but we have to reprogram them to be in alignment with who and what we've come here to be, as well as the awareness that we don't live in a world of separation. We live in an interconnected, interdependent web of life. And if we don't begin to function and work our circuits in that context, we'll remain modulated by the issues of the world. So, this slide's a little slow. So one of the cool ways about Dr. Joe's material is that the reprogramming of our mind is all about creating a future that pulls us into the discipline of reprogramming those circuits. You see, the effort it takes to kind of move towards a greater good that I decide this is what I want in my life, but I'm going to get there by reworking the circuits as opposed to trying to grab this externally. I'm going to learn how to draw something into my life. And that happens when we step out of our habits of being and into a different set of way of working those circuits. And wouldn't you like to know how to work those circuits differently? Okay, just a couple more clicks, we're almost there. So one of the ways in which you can totally step out of those circuits is to do what those circuits can't do all by themselves, but what your higher self causes something else to happen. And that is you begin to cultivate these three habits. Habit of gratitude, the habit of self-compassion, and the habit of presence. So I'm going to tell you now about a practice, how to implement this so that you can sort of see, oh, this is doable, and this can indeed produce shifts in how I'm being with what's going on. So when we recognize that whenever we are lost in an unconscious way of being with what we're having, our default way is going to make what we're having look and feel against us. Okay, so can we sort of start there? Okay, if we have that as our basic understanding, then we need to know in order to, then the sign is that I'm making my life as if it's against me, or I'm making somebody the matter with me. That's a flag, okay? Can you remember the last time you made somebody else the matter with you? Okay, so that's the time to do the practice. Or whenever you are kind of listening to a story and that's making you feel kind of yucky, and then you're feeling kind of yucky, kind of creates more story around the feeling, and then the feeling attaches itself to someone or something. Anybody ever do that? Okay, that's the self system. That's the time to do this practice. And we need to create a routine way of checking in. And so when the clerk says, "How's your day going?" you got to say, "I'm above average today." So at least raise the bar a bit. I started telling people I'm above average, and they like that. They like the ability to have permission to be better than just fine or okay. And so when we recognize, when we break the cycle of the system, we step into a different circuitry, and we can do that through a couple of easy ways. And so first of all, we have to notice that we're caught up in our story, or we're having our life against us and we're being a victim. We have to awaken to that's what's going on. The second thing is that we have to recognize we're lost in the unconscious circuits. Okay, that's what's happening. And so we have to step out of that circuitry so that we disconnect, needing to have this be a certain way. We disconnect, needing this to matter more than my sense of connection to my truth, my connection to my essence, my connection to the dimension of myself that is here to make a difference. That is the one. That is what Jesus called the Father, the dimension of us that's the higher self. And we activate that by stepping into the circuits where that dimension of us resides. And it begins by cultivating a habit of gratitude. And so just sense, what if you were in the habit of being with everything that you're having out of a sense of gratitude? How would your life be different? And can you see that it would be different? Okay, and then the next thing is to try it out and actually experience it being different. And then as you notice it being different, you're starting to develop new circuits. Oh, this is right. And then just imagine having the habit of self-compassion with whatever you're having, especially when you're dealing with those stories in your head or being a sense of victim by what's happening in your life. But to be able to instead be with that very same dynamic out of a deep sense of compassion. Can we not imagine how our experience would be different? Can you see how it might be different if you were in the habit of giving to yourself a depth of care and acceptance and permission and value? We have to give that to ourselves because it's not going to come out there as easily. Bless you. And can you see how if we were in the habit of being present in our life, paying attention to when for whatever reason we're having our life or somebody the matter with us, and recognizing that that's connected to a part of my conditioned habit of being me, little Gary, small s Gary, but I can step into a dimension of my being that lives independent of that conditioned program, and instead step into reprogramming this mechanism to a different way. And so now we can look at what does the circuitry look like when we're conscious, when we're not burdened by our habits, our unconscious self. And so we have to rework the circuits. And I'm just showing you this to show you that it's possible. I haven't given you a sense of how to engage and get involved in a deeper, more meaningful way with the circuitry, but that comes with understanding what we're trying to do and then trying some things out so you get a sense, get a taste of what is possible. So now let's look at this more completely in just a second. I just want to remind everyone that we've started a Morning Joe meditation group, 5:30 on Mondays, and we'll do that through the end of May. And so if you're interested in coming, be sure to be here before 5:30. We sometimes do laying down meditations, so if you want to bring a mat or a blanket, eye shades, blindfold, all that's useful for Dr. Joe's stuff. Okay, here's the practice. So first thing is to study this handout, and so there's three aspects of it. The first is to give you a detailed, drilled down sense of what is, when we talk about habits of being, doing, having, so on and so forth, we want to have a sense of what is being identified there. So for instance, our habits of being are moods. Anybody ever be in a mood? And if we stretch out the mood, it becomes a temperament. And if you stretch out and live in that temperament, it becomes your attitude. And if you have that attitude for a long time, it's going to be who you are. And so if we don't know that these are programs, they're not the truth of us, we won't do anything to shift it, to change it. So study the handouts and then find examples in your own personal life where you can see your unconscious ways showing up. And you can use this as a guide to kind of see where you're anchored in those unconscious circuits. And then routinely monitor your emotional state. When you find yourself in some kind of funk, ask yourself, how am I having my life right now? We have to begin to understand that we have our life the way it is unto us. And so when we understand that, then we can be in the question, well, how do I want to have my life unto me? Well, obviously, we don't want to have it as if it's against us. We want to have it as if it's for us, but we can't have it as if it's for us until we own what we're having. If we're still saying this is somebody else's problem or fault or reason, then we're not in the arena of transforming our own life. And then what story arises as you make sense of how you are feeling? Most of us, when we are emotionally altered in an uncomfortable way, we instantly go to creating a story about what's happening and then affix to the story externally the various elements of why we're feeling the way we're feeling. And then those feelings recreate the story or deepen it or create nuances that make this reality more vivid to us, and that we never are challenged because our stories are our truth. Everybody's story is their truth, but is your truth working for you? That's the issue. Okay, now notice how your stories in your head are supported by outer conditions. We always go outside of ourselves for evidence to understand how it is we feel the way we feel. We never look for the source of our discomfort inside as a limiting belief. It's our not enough. It's our inadequacy. It's our sense that we don't matter. That's the source of our discomfort. And if we are trying to manage that by trying to change the outer, we're not dealing with the real problem. And then finally, are you able to experience an emotion without creating a story about how your life has you? We have to stop. And I'm guilty of it too, but you see, I no longer can afford allowing myself to get away with having somebody else the matter with me. It doesn't serve me, and it doesn't serve the world. And it's really important that we create a community that really is serious about this work, if it's to have a depth of impact in our lives. And that's the game that I want to play. How about you? All right, God bless.
Am I on? There it is. Yes. So I woke up this morning in a funk, and interesting that the title was a waking meditation, and just in being in the two services, I'm experiencing an awakening. I have woken up to a new day by being here and listening to this. So I am grateful to the message, and I'm grateful to this community and to all of you here, because I think it's the energetic field when I enter those doors that help shift that. So awesome to this place. Yes.